Looks like more cruelty being leveled on these various countries via sanctions by Trump will continue until he's out of office, and doesn't really look like anything will change once Biden gets in there. It's disgusting. So it's from Alan McLeod at Mint Press News. I'll link it down below. Highly recommend Mint Press News. Trump enacts sweeping new sanctions on China, Iran, Venezuela. Biden promises more to come. Yay for all the people being affected by this in horrible ways. New sanctions come even as an estimated 100,000 people have been killed by American sanctions in Venezuela alone, as vital medical equipment and life-saving drugs have been blocked from entering the country. Oh, man. On its way out the door, Trump admin is ramping up another round of aggressive punishing sanctions against a host of countries. On Friday, the State Department announced new sanctions against Iran, People's Republic of China, and Venezuela. And today, it tightened the grip of the decades-long blockade on Cuba and increased sanctions on Nicaragua. And again, this doesn't spread freedom. These sanctions don't spread freedom or democracy. They're literally crimes against humanity. And the brunt of the impact of these are always going to be felt by the poor, by the working people, by the most vulnerable, the most marginalized in all of these countries. And they need to be called out. It's disgusting. In the case of Iran, measures were aimed at the oil industry and went so far as to sanction Vietnamese companies helping with the international supply of Iranian hydrocarbons. Today, thanks to the success of our sanctions, Iran is looking to come back to the negotiating table to get relief, Trump's special representative of Iran and Venezuela, Elliot Abrams, asserted, adding falsely that the Iranian nuclear program remains focused on weaponry, not civilian usage. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, a war criminal, also announced that 59 Chinese entities that were undermining our national security and foreign policy interests have been targeted. In the case of Venezuela, the action came as retaliation after it held an election the United States deemed to be fraudulent because they didn't like who was elected there, i.e. the socialists. The socialists now control, or they now have a supermajority in kind of the equivalent of their House of Representatives there, and because the socialists won, that's fraudulent. That's fraudulent, the U.S. State Department says. Get the fuck out of here. Trump admin has ramped up the use of sanctions, issuing around 3,800 new ones compared to 2,350 in President Obama's second term. Sanctions are an act of war, and when applied unilaterally, are often seen as illegal. The UN has formally denounced many of the U.S. sanctions, noting they disproportionately affect the poor and most vulnerable classes and not leaders of foreign governments, as is sometimes argued. The effect on Iran has been to essentially tank its economy and cause untold hardship on its people. Oil production has sputtered. The Iranian rial has lost the majority of its worth. Food and consumer goods have become scarce and far more expensive, and international travel is now much harder. Throughout 2020, the U.S. has hindered the import of humanitarian aid and personal protective equipment, adding to the COVID-19 epidemic inside the country. I mean, the pandemic's already fucking shitty enough here in the United States, and then here the U.S. government is creating more harm, suffering, and death in these countries all over the world during a pandemic. Once again, this is just another clear example. The U.S. government, the U.S. empire, is the biggest purveyor of death and destruction in the world. MLK said it, then in the 60s, and it's true now, unfortunately. National Iranian American Council, no lovers of the current admin in Tehran, described the U.S. sanctions as heartless and sadistic. Syed Mohammed Marandi, that dude's legit. I've heard him give some interviews before. Professor of English literature at the University of Tehran agreed, telling Mint Press in October that the sanctions deliberately target ordinary Iranians, women, and children. They're designed to kill hospital patients and to create poverty. They've had partial success. I mean, so disgusting. Really, it's like reading these things makes me feel so disgusted to be living in the United States, to see what our government does with our tax dollars to harm people all over the globe because we don't like who's in power there, because they won't do the bidding of the U.S. empire. It's so fucked up. The effect on Venezuela has been, if anything, more acute. An estimated 100,000 people have been killed by American sanctions, a fact barely reported in the West, as vital medical equipment and life-saving drugs have been blocked from entering the country. Alfred Dezais, an American UN Special Rapporteur, visited Venezuela, comparing life there to living under a medieval siege and declaring the United States as guilty of crimes against humanity. Of course they are. So many crimes against humanity. It's almost hard to remember it at times, honestly. There appears little hope for major change in tactics with the incoming admin. Biden-linked Washington think tank recently released a report calling for more innovative use of what it called coercive economic statecraft, i.e. sanctions. Center for New American Security was founded by Michelle Fournier, Biden's original pick for defense secretary, and is full of Obama-era officials like Victoria Nuland. Quote, the use of economic power backed up by all the available legal tools placed America's strengths as the dominant global economic power promises a continued stream of benefits, they argue, concluding that although there are inevitably going to be costs, aka in this case 100,000 people dead in Venezuela because of the war crimes the U.S. is committing there. That's just a cost. It's good for our strategic interest in the country. I mean, this is fucking disgusting. This is literally life and death. Like, what the fuck is wrong with these people? Possibly increasing ones associated with the use of coercive economic tools, and the benefits are also going to increase. What benefits? Like, these fucking war criminals, man, arguing for these sanctions. It's disgusting. It's just a form of economic warfare. Just because there's boots on the ground doesn't mean there's not death and suffering as a result. And obviously these people know that. They want to make the conditions in these countries so bad that the people there would be more amenable to, a coup, voting out the socialists in Venezuela or whatever it may be. News agency Reuters also recently released a report based on conversations with people close to the 78-year-old former VP, noting that sanctions will remain a central instrument of U.S. power under his admin, suggesting we likely ramp up sanctions against Russia. Far from dropping the practice, Biden's major challenge, according to those cited, will be to sort out which sanctions to keep. Get rid of all the fucking sanctions, really. Which to undo and which to expand. Get rid of all of them. On Iran. On Venezuela. On Syria. On Cuba. On Nicaragua. On North Korea. Be done. All of them. All of them. You want to really help those countries out? Doing it through humanitarian, diplomatic means. Appears will continue to be full steam ahead for America's sanctions regime in 2021. Wow. Yeah, that's more great news, more sanctions, more death and destruction coming under a Biden administration near you to these countries all over the globe. And he's right. A lot of people in the West don't talk about that. 100,000 people in Venezuela have died from these U.S. sanctions. I mean, it's disgusting. It's disgusting. Crimes against humanity. The people who helped implement this stuff should literally be tried as war criminals at the fucking Hague. I think that's in the Netherlands, right? At the International Criminal Court. It's disgusting. And if you're not upset, you're not pissed off about this, what are you doing? Subscribe for more content. Like the video if you like the damn video. If not, dislike it. Cool. That's cool too. Peace. Much love.